How's everyone doing? Okay, I see. More coffee should be on the feedback, I guess. It's not that late. All right,
Shall we start?
I guess.
All right. Yeah, so this is the last talk. So we wanted to do something a bit more special. This is a subject that is very close to my heart and to Martin's heart as well. That's why we're giving this talk together. We sometimes talk about this stereotype that is the brilliant developer. So we wanted to tackle that today. So my name is Carmen, and this is my lovely partner in crime
on this
Martin. Yeah, and today we're going to talk about the myth of the brilliant developer.
Yeah.
As a forward to this, just to give you an insight about why we wanted to talk about this. This kind of stems from a personal experience. I can only talk for myself, but for me, especially from a personal experience, it's something that I have been struggling in my career ever since the beginning of my career. So we encountered this in actually a lot of people as I was talking to them. So it kind of hit me that I'm kind of not the only person who's going through this. So we wanted to give it a take. We really want to emphasize that it is stemming from a personal experience. It doesn't mean that if this is our experience, this is everybody's experience. Every individual comes from their own context, but we're tackling it from our point of view. And we're really hoping that for people who have been struggling with this, that we can give some helpful tips about how to cope with this.
Yeah.
And for those of you who will think like, well, okay, I never had this problem before, we're also hoping that it can give you a bit of awareness of what some people are struggling with, and maybe it gives you some tools to help your colleagues or to help other community members.
That's specifically true for people who are in leadership positions, because you might not realize how much power and influence you have locally as globally. If you are a conference speaker, if you are standing on stages at meetups, if you are organizing events, if you are leading teams, you have a voice that you should give to those who are disenfranchised, and sometimes people can't voice the issues themselves. So if you spot a problem, speak up about it. And if we can give you some tools to help those around you that might be struggling with the things that we're going to address, then that's really, really valuable, and we encourage you to use these tools.
Right, and the other thing that I want to point out is that this is a talk that is also based on, two scientific books, actually. One is written by a very famous choreographer. Her name is Twyla Tharp. It's called The Creative Habit. And the other book, which I actually have with me, if you want to have a look, it's called Mindset, and it's written by Carol Dweck. She's a researcher at Stanford, and she's been writing a lot about this. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's not just coming out of thin air. There is research in it.
Yeah, so that's kind of the context of the talk. So let's get into it. So I talked about this book, Mindset. This has actually been a real milestone for me. I was heading to a conference in Atlanta, and I just totally randomly ran into this book, and it really changed my life. Because in her book, she talks about these two types of mindset. The first one is the fixed mindset. It's a mindset in which people think that their qualities are set for their entire life. So they think that even through hard work, they will not be able to change the qualities that they were born with. And the other mindset is called the growth mindset, which is kind of the opposite of this one. It's a mindset in which people think that their basic qualities, so the qualities they are born with, are just a representative of their current state, and that is a ground that they can build upon. So that is something that they can grow, they can change with work, with experience, and so on. And I realized after reading that book that I was very much in the fixed mindset. And this has caused a lot of problems for me in my career because well, let's say that I always had to work very hard as a developer. So I always thought that, even if I'm working hard enough, I don't have it. So no matter how hard I work, it's still not going to change. And this was a book that really gave me hope that if I do work hard enough and if I work smart, I can become better and I can become a better developer. So I just wanted to point that out because that kind of gives also context of how we're going to approach things.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic starting point for the rest of this, basically.
So I'm going to ask you this. Sorry, did I? I'm sorry, yeah. So who is the brilliant developer?
That's a great question, isn't it? If we look into our media and into how developers are often portrayed and how we are celebrating basically popular people in the community and actually in media as well, what do we learn? There is a film or a documentary about the release of Mozilla, the original Mozilla browser as Netscape transformed from the traditional company into an open source thing. I think it's called the Code Project or something like that. And it's basically, it shows these developers who are just like sitting around a whiteboard and then just like someone gets up and effortlessly solves a really complicated problem, or people sitting in the office. There's this one person, they keep on retainer basically. He would sleep in the office, and whenever another team has a problem, they would call upon himself. So he might sit there, play PlayStation or eat something, and they come like, we have a problem, and he would just go and like look at the code and like type into the keyboard, and then the problem is solved and he goes back to sleep. So that's the image that we are being fed. If you look at The Social Network, a film from, I think it was 2010 or something like that, about Mark Zuckerberg. He is this kid that sits in the dorm, in his dorm room, and basically just hacks into the keyboard, and boom, Facebook happens, and then becomes really valuable, and it becomes a company, and it grows. Or Napster. We are celebrating these individual people. Now we are very much putting other people onto pedestals, like Elon Musk, right? Oh my God, Elon Musk, he's flying to Mars. Completely ignoring their backstory, the problematic habits that exist in all these companies and all the different paths that people had to get where they are. Steve Jobs was being iconized. Bill Gates, right? All these people, there are all these brilliant people out there who were just like effortlessly doing a thing and then became big. Isn't that the picture that we have in our heads?
Yeah, sort of. So for me, it was the picture that I have in my head when I think of a brilliant developer is this person that can solve problems really fast by themselves without the help of a team. That they have this intellectual capability to pick up things almost instantly. And they're kind of like a well of knowledge. So no matter how many questions you would throw at such a person, they would always know the answer. It's as if it's a person that knows everything, which it sounds silly because I know that like it's hard to know everything, but somehow it's very ingrained in the stereotype. So this is kind of my image of a brilliant developer.
And then also we have this thing that we like to make them into Wunderkinder, right? They are people who probably have started picking up computer skills at an early age and have basically been writing, I don't know, their own operating system at 12 or something, I don't know. Like these are the ideas that we're having, that these people just come from a place of knowing it all and being effortlessly able to do it all, and they just, as you say, they are infinite in their wisdom, and yeah.
Right. Yeah, so when I was reading Carol's book and Twyla's book, I actually realized that because they're also both talking about this and they're giving examples like Mozart or Einstein and so on, I realized that like this myth kind of revolves around kind of three concepts. There's this concept of talent, of like you're born with it. There's this concept of effortlessness. And there's also a concept of failure. Like, so I was thinking that maybe we can just take each one of these and
Sounds
then
good.
just discuss a little bit about them.
So let's dig in.
Yeah, so the first one I really want to talk about is talent. And then my biggest question to this, and also as a dancer, this is something that we talk about a lot in the performance world, is talent something that you are born with?
It's a really, really tricky one. Is talent something that you were born with, or is that something... I guess you are I think talent is something that is to some degree innate, but I don't think it is as important as we think it is, right? We think that you have to have talent to do a thing.
Right.
If you're not having it, then can you even get there, right?
That's interesting. I like this idea of that you say that we actually give it more importance than it is.
It has.
Because I think, so I used to think that if you don't have that, like talent is something that you're obviously born with.
You have it or you don't.
You have it or you don't. But nowadays, I think more in the direction of, so when you're born, you kind of have an affinity towards something. Like for me, it has always been dance. I always had this, it just came more natural to me that, I could dance, I guess. But I also think that is just not enough. And I actually have a dance school to prove that. Because you go to dance school and then you're like, well, yeah, everybody kind of has this affinity. And then it turns out that's also not enough. So I think of talent as something that maybe it's like your passion, something that you want to do. Or, yeah, you feel more connected to that. But I think that's kind of where talent kind of ends.
Yeah, I like rephrasing. I really, really support this idea of rephrasing talent as affinity, because that's you're coming out of a place of, oh, I want to look into this, I want to look into that. It's basically where you spend your time, or where you are okay spending more effort in, right?
Right.
So dancing, no, I don't want to dance. But I spend a lot of time learning or refining my diving skills, and someone else might be like, oh no, I do that climbing. So I wouldn't necessarily say like it limits you in what you can do. I believe everyone can learn to dance. I learn how to dance. I'm terrible at it, but I learned it. And I don't enjoy myself doing it necessarily. You learn how to climb a mountain without dying. I learned how to dive without dying. So we learned all these things, and I believe we can learn the things that we don't think we have talent for. It's just that we are overpricing talent. We put too much emphasis on talent that holds us back.
Yeah, I actually, so Carol in her book, she mentions this study where they talk about prodigy children. And what they do in the study is that they take a group of prodigy children, which were, they were assessed by IQ tests and so on. And so they follow their growth throughout their life. And then it actually turns out that for a lot of the children in that group, even though they started as prodigy children, they didn't turn out to be prodigy adults. So throughout the course of their life, so they were doing well, but that exceptional talent that they were kind of assessed with at the beginning, it didn't necessarily lead to like very extraordinary accomplishments and so on. So I found that actually to be very interesting.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not what you're given with, it's what you're making.
Make out of it. Yeah, I think that's a really important one.
Which ties back into the growth mindset, right? You can learn things, you can excel at skills, you just have to work harder than others, maybe.
Yeah, and actually Twyla gives this example of Mozart, because Mozart is considered a musical genius, and she actually argues that weren't it for his father. So his father apparently was also a very good musician, And he really inspired Mozart, starting from from a very early age. And they were studying together, and he explained. So there was a lot of inspiration in his father, and also his father kind of led him towards the musical world. So in her book, she argues that hadn't been for his father and his teachings and he learned him the discipline of hard work and so on, maybe Mozart wouldn't have been Mozart.
That leads into the second big thing, doesn't it? So for talent, we assume that all our creative, I'm not sure if this comes from Mindset as well, the quote, right, that we're seeing right now.
Oh, no, this is from Twyla.
Oh, this is from Twyla, sorry. So in this case, like all creative acts are born out of some transcendent Dionysian act of inspiration. So what we think is talent is this sprinkle, like a Roman god in this case flies over us and goes, kashoom, and then we're like, ooh, I have an idea, which is something that we can't control, right? This is out of our control. We can't say, Dionysus, come here, I need you right now, you little bastard. We can't really control that, but I think talent, while being this affinity, which we can or cannot really control, I guess, needs to be tied into the second big thing, which is effort, isn't it?
Right.
Mozart was putting in the effort starting at an early age.
Yeah.
Learning how to make music, how to create music, how to express himself in music. And I guess, would you say that effort is underappreciated?
I actually think so. There is a very nice excerpt in the Mindset book. It mentions this story that we probably all know about the hare and the tortoise. And she says something really nice. This story was supposed to teach us that the slow and steady run will get you to the win. But at the end of the story, actually everybody wanted to be a less chaotic hare. And I found that very interesting because I think it's true. So so she argues that like through these stories, we kind of shaped a society where we appreciate more achievements that come out of effortless effort, basically.
Yeah.
So effort kind of gets a bit of a negative.
And we downplay our effort all the time. It's like, ooh, that dish that you cooked was fantastic. You know, it's just a recipe I found.
Yeah. Like I was reading a couple of studies, so apparently people are studying this quite a lot. So there is one about Nobel Prize winners. And so in this study, they wanted to see kind of what was the age at which most of the Nobel Prize winners produced their most influential work. And so in the beginning, they just, they started following their work, and then, like number of publications, the most influential publication, and age, boom, that's it. And then at some certain point, they realized, but wait, not everybody starts at the same age. Like, not everybody starts at the same point. Not everybody publishes their first paper at the same age.
There's a lot of like socioeconomic factors playing into this as well.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah, backgrounds, context, and so on. And so what they did was they said, well, let's measure that starting from their first publication. And then what it actually turned out is that for most of the scientists and artists and chemists and biologists and so on, there is actually this time span of 10 years. So it took, on average, each scientist or a Nobel Prize winner, it took on average 10 years of hard work and of publications, out of which some are considered not to be like very influential, or
successful. Yeah.
Exactly. And so then this 10 years rule was actually born. So they say that it kind of takes on average 10 years of kind of effort
work
in order to produce, like to come to the peak of your abilities, which I found very interesting.
That's an interesting one. It's interesting to see that you can like find such an average, and I think it goes to show this might tie back into the mythical man month, right? You can't use more people to make it faster, and you can only work so much harder to speed things up. Even if you work yourself to more or less to death, you might not be able to drop that 10 years significantly, right?
Yeah, and I think there's also that 10,000 hours rule.
I think it's 10,000 hours to mastery, yeah.
Yeah, to mastery, something like that. So I don't think there's a way around it.
I don't think so.
At least also having, from the experience that I had, and also from discussing with other people, I don't think there's a way around it.
Damn it, that means we have to actually do the work.
Yeah, damn.
Damn, no cheating.
Yeah.
Right, but I guess like within this effort, I think it also just takes time for each of us to like iterate on what we believe to be true, to build hypotheses, to prove or disprove these hypotheses, to improve, to iterate again. And I guess part of it is also failing, isn't it? You cannot, if I do the same thing for 10 years, I'll probably not improve. I'll probably not get somewhere, will I?
Yeah, absolutely.
I need to make mistakes to learn where I need to change, where I need to improve, where my understanding needs to evolve.
Right.
So I don't think things do come easy to people, even if we perceive them as geniuses.
Yeah.
Do they?
Yeah, and I think actually literature kind of shows us exactly the opposite. That people who are kind of regarded as geniuses or natural talents, they're actually the sum of a lot of years of hard work.
And a lot of trying.
And a lot of
again,
trial and
right?
error, yeah. Which kind of brings us
to the next one.
Failure. You want to start on this one?
Well, I just find it so interesting to see that the American startup culture is often characterized as fail fast and then like learn from the failure. And whenever I see startups these days, and it doesn't really matter where, I'm really scared to see to which extent and which length many startups go to just carry on funding or raising funds to not admit that they failed at what they set out to do. So this is kind of weird, isn't it? Like we say failure is an option and we should always consider to fail fast and then like learn from it, but we're not really practicing that, are we? Why is that?
So I think that one of the problems here is that actually with time, the act of failing has become an identity. So instead of saying, I failed at this, and then, I can learn from it and grow from it and so on, it becomes, I failed, and ergo, I'm also a failure because I have failed.
All right, so you don't see it as part of the process, you see it as a personality trait, basically.
Well, Carol argues that that really comes down again to the two mindsets.
Right.
Because the fixed mindset, that's very ingrained in it. So with a fixed mindset, every failure that you go through it's a very hard blow for you, because it constantly reminds you that you don't have the skills and you don't have it, and
you will never
that's
get it. And there you go, you're stuck here. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas for
place.
the growth mindset, not only that they see failure as a growing opportunity, but it actually turns out that people with growth mindset don't even see it as a failure. They actually see it as an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
It's a learning experience. It has nothing to do with failure whatsoever.
Yeah.
This was actually one of the most liberating things for me when I realized that, if you don't have it yet, if you failed at it, it doesn't say anything. It just says something about, it's the yet. I really like that.
Yet.
It's yet. Yeah. You don't have it yet. but you can have it. It just shows you, what you're currently lacking. It shows you what you can grow in.
A friend of mine put it quite nicely. So like, if you look at a thing, if you're doing something, then there are the known things. You know certain things to be true and correct because you have observed that before. You have. I know that I will probably at some point write some HTML to make a web application. That's just a fact. I might need a database to store my stuff. That's also more or less a known. But then there's the known unknowns, like, oh, I have to use this new framework that I have never used before. I have to use this database technology that I have never worked before, but I know that I will have to learn it. And then there are the unknown unknowns, right? The things that you don't even know exist. And I think I don't see, when I make a mistake and I fail, I don't see that as a failure. I'm like, oh, okay, so here is an unknown unknown that is now becoming a known unknown. And then I can work on learning that thing that I didn't know before to make that a known thing, and then move on with the next. So I think this is a really important bit, and I have noticed that the one quality that all companies that I enjoy working in, and all the companies that I saw where people actually grew, were companies that acknowledge that failure is an option and actually not a bad thing, as long as we learn something from it, right? When I joined Google, and my team specifically, we did a bunch of stuff that no one has, at least in our company, has done before. And I'm like, okay, so here we have 4 options, and I don't have any data on what is the best option. I don't know what we need to do. And I don't know why, but we believe that other people have the magical answers. That's not always true. In our case, everyone was like, neither do I. Who am I to know how we should tackle this particular problem? That's what we hired you for. That's why we believe you have an idea of what you need to be doing, and we didn't have, from these 4 ideas, 3 of them are new to us, so good job. I'm like, okay, that doesn't help me, because I was afraid of making a big mistake. Like, I just joined Google, what if I completely screw up? And then my manager told me, look, here's the thing. None of us knows. Like, we don't know this. Like, we're gonna basically strategically pick, which means, right? Like, we're gonna make a hypothesis. We're gonna make a bet. We're gonna see what happens, and we're gonna see quickly what happens. And if that doesn't yield the results that we expected, then we're gonna regroup and see further, like how we're gonna deal with this. So I was very, very afraid of making a mistake. I made that mistake because I had my team backing me up, and they're like, no, go. We would have done the same thing probably. Like, you do this thing now. And I'm like, okay. A couple of months later, I'm like, this went completely the other way. And I know why, and this is what we didn't know, and this is what we know now, and this is what we should do next. And people were like, cool, moving on. And I'm like, you mean I'm not fired? Apparently not. I'm still getting paid.
Twyla talks about this in her book, because as a choreographer, that's like one of the worst things, like making a grandiose failure, on a I don't know, American ballet theater on the stage and so on. But what I really like about what she says is that like every failure actually gives her tools to cope with the next one, or to maybe avoid the next one.
Yes.
And I really like that idea, that you can take so much good stuff out of whatever failure that you make and turn that into like an actual tool in your tool belt.
In your tool belt or toolbox, and then just move on. And next time you encounter such a point where you're not sure, you can draw that tool and go like last time.
And she goes even further than that, and she actually goes to kind of incorporate that in her creative habit. And so every time when she started with a new choreography, she would like have that in the back of her head, and then she would have all these tools, and that kind of became part of her creative process, because she would know the things that would work for her and the things that would not work. And I really like that idea.
That's really, really
that
cool.
it's giving you something back, and something that it's lifelong also. And I think that's very, very valuable.
Yay.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, don't make a failure part of your identity. Failing is fine, it's part of the learning process. If you're not failing every now and then that means you haven't learned anything. But that being said, do not make the same mistakes. Learn from these mistakes. Try to understand why they happened, and don't be like, oh yeah, I just had a bad day. No, there is some trigger that causes a failure, and if you understand that, you can turn it into a tool.
So, why are these things bad? Like, why is having such a stereotype? Okay, let me ask this differently. What are the consequences of having such a stereotype, and not just in the developer community, but in any community, really?
I think in general we are limiting ourselves. What we should be striving for is becoming better versions of ourselves and allowing each other to be imperfect, to fail, to have failures, to make mistakes, as long as we do not damage each other too much, and as long as we make sure that we as a community are healing and getting better and growing stronger from it. I think with this like overemphasis on talent and underestimation of effort, we are limiting ourselves from growing to where we could be.
And I also think we are pushing people away.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you have somebody who, who does, for whom, I don't know, coding or whatever, doesn't come as naturally as for others, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can do it. It might just mean that they need more time to do it.
Yeah.
But by having this kind of stereotype in place, you're pushing these people away, because it's basically you don't even give them a chance to learn to do it.
And that also manifests in hiring, right? It's like we want people that have certain technical skills, completely ignoring and disregarding. If people are putting in the effort to get there, to get better, to maybe reach it, just because someone does not know how to write React or hasn't already done it in 4 or 5 years, that doesn't mean that if you would give them the environment to grow and the possibility to make mistakes, doesn't mean that they will be a fantastic developer a year later.
Yeah, and I also see it a lot, for example, with the first-time contributors to open source projects, where people say, and I mean, I have never contributed to open source projects because of this, because you look at the project and you think, well, that's such a huge code base. I can never contribute to this. I can never make up for all the knowledge that it's in there. It's just I probably can't do it. And I think it's so important to kind of have this this awareness, or to remind yourself that it always starts with a very small step. Like, you have to start somewhere. You have to learn at the starting point.
Yes.
So yeah, this for me really ties into what we're discussing here.
Absolutely, and there's nothing that is too small to give back to the community, really, especially when it comes to open source, right? If you are struggling with something, that doesn't mean that you're not having it or you can't get there. It just means that there might be something inherent to the thing that you can change by writing a blog post or even a tweet saying like, oh, I learned that if I do this differently, then actually it works, and I don't know that. My first open source contribution, that was long ago. I was using a JavaScript, a jQuery plugin actually, for select drop-down boxes. And it had a little glitch that it wouldn't cause a change event, like it wouldn't fire a change event if I would actually change the value. And I wrote a one-line fix in my code, and I'm like, hold on. If I'm having this problem, other people might. I may as well just send a pull request and see what happens. And that was merged, and my mind was blown. Was that a fantastic, complicated solution? No. Was that a big contribution? No. Was it a contribution that helped probably someone somewhere not running into the same problem? I think so. And that's just, keep that in mind. Nothing is too small.
Yeah, and I think, well, and then I can say this from personal experience, is that I think that one of the biggest drawbacks of having such a stereotype is that it kind of paralyzes you.
It does.
So you don't try.
Because
And-
you want to be there, but you don't want to fail in front of others to get there, right?
Yeah, but or sometimes you also think that, well, you should just be able to get
Yeah,
there without the,
Without
the
having
10
to
years
put in the
of
effort, yeah.
yeah, and that's harsh, because if you don't try, or if you don't start somewhere, you won't grow.
Yeah.
Like the way that I think about it now is, I could either stay where I am and just not do anything and say, well, I can't do it, or I can say, well, I can just make whatever small step in a growth direction. And I compare 0, like having done nothing, to a small step, and whatever small step is better than 0. And then over a longer period of time, every small
They add
incremental step, it actually adds up to like a big growth, improvement, whatever.
Yeah.
No project was born in a current state. It grew through smaller
got
steps.
there. Yes.
So I think of it as the same way.
Yeah, I mean, even a small step is infinitely larger than 0.
Exactly, yeah. You can do nothing, or you can do something.
Something. Choose something.
Yeah, I agree. So let's maybe recap.
So,
So.
fundamentally, we had 3 aspects that play into this myth of the brilliant developer, the myth that there are people descending from above, going like, typey, 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 Linux, or typey, 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 React, or Angular for that matter. Its effort gets under-prioritized or undervalued. Do not, please, 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 never downplay your effort. It's fine to say, I put so much work into this, I'm so proud of myself for having made this thing that I made here, and it took me a week, it took me a month, it took me a year. We are overplaying or like inflating the meaning of talent.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And we should allow ourselves to fail.
Agreed. So I wrote a couple of things, also a couple of quotes from the books, but also from my learnings. So that the first one is from Twyla, who says that there's no natural genius. And for her, at the end of the day, it's all about the hard work that you put in.
Putting in the hours.
And the habit, and being consistent with the work that you put into something.
Taking small steps, but continuously taking them.
Yeah. The other one is that there is no shortcut to mastery. There just isn't.
It's just, yeah. No.
That's it.
It is a bit of an uphill battle, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
But it's an uphill battle.
Oh, sorry.
Whoops.
Went too many.
One more, forward.
Right. This is one that I particularly like, because many times people like to compare themselves with their idols and so on. And I do think it's good to have somebody that you aspire to be like, or to have their skills, or but I think that when you measure your progress, you should always look back at where you started from, not necessarily where you wanna go to, because that's how you will see your progress.
Look at your own old work. Look at work from 5 years ago. Look at something that you've written or done a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, how long you are in the industry, a month ago, a week ago. Is there something that you could do better? If the answer is yes, that means you've learned something. You have improved yourself. You have taken a step forward. And oftentimes we don't notice that, and oftentimes we don't recognize that. And also, don't look at Twitter or GitHub. That's the highlight reel of other people. You don't see the stuff that happened behind the scenes, the duct tape, the pain, the humiliation, the screaming at the computer, the throwing a rubber duck through the room. I don't know what people do. I usually just call myself an idiot a few times, and then a few times more. You don't see that. It looks like, ooh, look at that. There's like this one commit, it says initial commit, and it has all this cool stuff, but that's a lie. It's probably hours, days, weeks of work and
Git
deleting
reflog.
stuff, and like, just git rebase, there we go, just stash them all as a first commit. Yeah.
The other important one is that I think anything can be learned.
Yeah.
As long as that's what you want to do. If you want to learn something, you can do it.
Yeah.
I
think so.
Yeah.
I think that is true.
And then when you're learning, I think it's really important to remember that time takes the time takes. And I think that one is a really important one.
Can't cheat time.
Yeah, that's
All
it.
right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.